What's up, folks? Casual Dad here with another Warhammer Combat Cards Warlord guide. And tonight I've got a really exciting one for you. This is Canoness Veridyan for Servants of the Emperor. Arguably, this is a small exaggeration, but not a big one. Arguably the most powerful warlord in the entire game. A little bit level dependent, but super good early on, all the way through, and absolutely bonkers at top level, especially since the addition of secondary traits for epics and legendaries. The Canoness is terrifying. Her own stats are not great. For the attacks she brings and the hit points she has, 28 points is pretty high. She does have shields and Inspiring Presence. Inspiring Presence only goes up to rank 2 because she's epic. But that's not why you bring her. So she does have shields up to rank 4, which is very good for keeping her alive. And shields do a reduction in your total hit points, so having decent hit points on top of shields is really good, because that means that the threshold to actually take damage through your shields is higher. Which is not to say that you can't take damage through your shields, especially the Crimson Hunter Exarch in a Farsight deck, or some of the scarier things in a Shazo Rely Tau deck will just punch straight through this Warlord and take her out in the beginning. But that's only if you have the edge to actually do that. But the real thing that makes her very scary is her trait. Talent, her ability. Spirit of the Martyr. When one of your Servants of the Emperor cards is destroyed, one of your other cards at random makes a melee attack for 75% of its melee stat. Now we're going to play a couple games so you can kind of see how that performs. But looking at this deck, again, she is level dependent. She really does lean on some powerful epics. Some power legendary, excuse me. This one being one of the most common ones you're ever going to see because both good stats, good health, okay cost, melee focused, and has endless. So double benefit there. So not only does she get 2 lives, so you get the most out of her and she doesn't give up too much, but also when one of her lives dies, she triggers the Canoness's ability to get that bonus attack on the board and has Inspiring Presence for it to boot. So absolutely incredible. Mine's only level 5 and still a clutch piece. At level 10 or level 13, this thing is a monster. Especially those stats are boosted by that Inspiring Presence, so they're actually higher than it says here. So really good. Another piece, this guy is phenomenal. For 25 points, he's completely insane. Curtis Hicks is one of the best melee cards in the game, especially with the combination of decent hit points, really good cost, Big Game Hunter, and Furious Charge, and a very high melee stat. He's particularly good in a Canoness deck because he can attack a bunch of times, but he's just good. Yeah, watch out for this guy, especially when they bring in the super heavies and the bigger cards in the larger game mode. I expect this guy to make a splash still. Absolutely excellent piece. Even if you don't run into a lot of 40 plus cost cards, he still is an excellent piece. Jumping around a bit, of course, you've got your Taunt, and then you've got your Endless. I usually only put one Endless in here because one of the downsides of Canoness is that it is random who does the melee attack, and it is entirely possible for one life of this guy to go down, and then for this guy to be the one that triggers the bonus attack, and he will attack for like 4 damage, which will strip a shield, but that's about it. It's not even enough to take out a Akaran second life, so he's not the guy you want getting that. And the same is true of the other Endless cards. So I only put one in here. It makes it a little bit thinner, but does definitely make a difference in terms of your bonus attacks. So that's kind of a key piece I wanted to highlight. Another really strong piece you're going to see in here is the Penitent Engine. Has Death Blow, so you trigger the bonus attack and also do Death Blow with a decently high melee attack. I will absolutely love it when I get that 1 additional melee level to go over 100 base damage. Because this one has pretty low hit points for the cost. Does have the high melee damage, but is still kind of a gamble to play because it's a power piece that can be removed fairly easily and may or may not give you your money's worth. So that my other cards have leveled up to the point to compensate for that has made this deck much more powerful. So it's not always necessarily just the level of your centerpiece cards, like the Penitent Engine. It's also the level of the deck around it to kind of compensate if that card is taken out, if that's the one you're counting on. So again, Canoness is a little bit level dependent, but most of these cards are common or rare. So she can certainly succeed even without your epics or legendaries, even if those are the cards that supercharge her ability. To wrap it up, I've got a cheap filler at 5 points that also happens to be melee focused and have Furious Charge. And then I've also got this guy who is criminally efficient for the cost, the hit points, and the melee hit and Furious Charge in the Canoness's deck. Like, this guy is awesome. Very powerful piece to put in your melee servants decks, especially at Canoness, because he both hits very hard, will die, but will definitely get your points worth fairly comfortably. And lastly, I do like to sprinkle in a shield card, whatever you've got. And now that she's got a decent melee attack stat, also decent health and rank 3 shields, she's the one that fills that in place of my endless cards. So instead of having my endless cards be the ones that soak up a lane, I do have a shield card in case there's something that I really just want to avoid rather than take out. So we have that. Of course, you can always put in some more endless and taunt cards if you want. Medicae is decent in a Canoness deck, but I personally choose to focus almost exclusively on offense. So you want your heavy melee pieces in there, especially your Furious Charges, power pieces in there too. One thing that is worth considering though is a Psionic Blast. So either this guy or your 31 point guy down here are very powerful pieces to include in this because they are both, this guy at least, is pretty good in melee and also will clear shields and clear injured cards before your turns. And also will attack back with Psychic and defense. Another power piece to consider, especially as an alternative to the Penitent engine, is this guy right here. Hits like an absolute truck in both melee and ranged, has decent hit points, and again has Furious Charge. And man, he's good. And he does come in cheaper than the Penitent engine, and because he has Furious Charge, he gives you more initiative because he does most of his damage before your opponent acts rather than after, which Death Blow kind of backloads your power play of the card. So certainly a good one to consider. I don't usually consider these. I do see this guy in here fairly often. Has that big game hunter, has very high stats, can be a very powerful piece and has the more hit points. Also much better on ranged, even if he does trade that for being a little bit worse in melee. He's a good piece to consider replacing your Penitent engine with, but you do need to make sacrifices in the rest of the deck if you do that, just because you have the other 7 points beyond what I'm showing here. I wouldn't consider most of these guys. This one probably at some point will be good. It is funny. Nah, she doesn't have a high enough melee attack. I don't know. Nah, wouldn't consider that one. Some other good ones, though, are going to be like your... This guy's a great one to slot in. Once I get him to higher level, especially once he gets Death Blow, I'll thoroughly consider subbing him in instead of my Penitent engine and then upping something else with the points. Because he's pretty good. And before, I didn't have the Penitent engine, and I had, instead of the sister, I had this guy, who's just not as good. Like, his stats are better, clearly, but he's also more, he's 11 points more, which really adds up in a deck. So I've sort of streamlined this a bit to make it better. This, I think, is probably my best bet. This guy is a very strong piece, has outflank, which is great, and then decent stats, and has the range to help kind of round out your deck and make it both ranged and melee, which is pretty good. Those are kind of the big pieces. Again, your taunt and your other melees, whatever you have that's doing your best melee damage is what you want in here, but this build is the one that I personally have settled on and is very similar to the ones that I see at the kind of the upper level play. So we're going to play our 2 games, and we'll see how this goes. And I am right now actively laddering Servants at the end of week 2, so we may actually see some pretty scary matchups on this one. Ooh, Azrael. And now Azrael is very frightening, but the AI doesn't usually play Azrael very well. We'll start with this guy. Alright, Bjorn. Bjorny-born. Pop you there, and we'll benefit from some extra attacks. Now this is a little bit tricky, because I do want to deal with Bjorn. Ooh, man, that was a smart play. So I am going first. Let's going to take a look at this. Man, that is a terrible matchup. So I considered some different things here. Ideally, what I would do in this case is I would have done a Psychic ready, which would have taken me some Psychic damage, but not too bad. And then I would have tried to put down one of my Furious Charge cards to clear that lane on the right so I could hit Mephiston outside of his Fear trigger. Excuse me. Instead, we're going to do this. I can pretty much guarantee he's going to do either ranged or Psychic, probably Psychic, which will then trigger, which should comfortably Psychic, okay. So he's going to kill this guy in the middle, which is perfect because that triggers one of my melees, and I got very lucky there that it was Hicks himself to really put the hurt on Bjorn. Now, this was an interesting build for him to go with. I like Bjorn, but he's relatively low level, and he's 70 points. If you're bringing Bjorn, you got to really mean it. And I'm going to kill him pretty comfortably here, and that's going to put a giant gaping hole in that deck and make this a fairly comfortable win. Especially Bjorn and Mephiston. it's not the worst combo, but it's a very high-risk combo, because the thin deck, and if one of them goes down, then you don't have much else going on, unless he has a high-level Azrael, which no one does, because Azrael's brand new. So this should be over fairly quickly. It's going to take me a minute to clean up. Free attack. It's good either way. No matter who gets that free attack, it's going to be good. That was good. Now, I will say, this is a high-level Mephiston who's taking an absolute beating. He's level 6, which is still fairly high. But Hicks is going to finish this because a low-level Azrael is really, really vulnerable to Big Game Hunter. And I'm practically guaranteed... Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Okay. So now I'm going to full strength hit back, and that should just one-shot him. And the death blow. Yikes. And then it's not going to matter because of that, but I did lose 2 cards there before any bonus attacks had been done. So Hicks would have attacked again, and then also done his melee attack. So he would have attacked 3 times that turn. 2 bonus attacks, and then also his own attack back because the guy attacked with melee. So, and that's really where Canoness can get really scary. If you're playing against a Canoness deck, you're like, oh, I've got this. And then something turns and you're like, that deck just hit me 6 times on my turn. Oh, God. Yeah. So again, I don't think it's much exaggeration saying that Canoness is probably the single most powerful warlord in the game if you have the cards in the collection to match her. So if you do see a Canoness deck, it is going to be a difficult match. And put you here. Okay. No, let's go ahead and do this. Let's give me some early initiative here. Now, this is really going to put this to the test, because this is a fairly high-level deck, and one of the other warlords I'd put as probably the best in the game is Shazo. And being a ranged-heavy deck, he's going to hit me where I'm weakest. Where most decks I'm going to run into will be a little bit more in the middle. But hitting me with pure ranged with Shazo, who has the dramatic extra bonus damage, is going to make this pretty tough. But I did front load with my Endless card, my Endless Chaff card, right in the middle of his beefiest attack, and I'm going to keep cheesing that to kind of use this ship, or use this card against him. Where, yes, it's taking out my cheap cards, but every time it does it, I get a free bonus attack. And get to clear cards on the right. So I'll clear the cards on the right much more quickly, and so that'll give me a bit of an edge, even if I'm losing some of my cheapest cards on the left. And that's a really important piece to note with the Canoness, is she is extremely good. And not one of the harder warlords to play, but certainly not one of the easier ones either. And now you're going to see the angel attack twice, because both her copy and then also the horse guy in the middle died in that. But now my gamble of kind of spending my cheaper cards on the middle is now going to start being tested pretty hard. And we're going to go ahead and throw this taunt guy in here. We'll see if Hicks can bring it home. And he should be able to take that guy out, even with the damage reduction. But that damage reduction may make all the difference here, and that may survive. It did not. Okay. But that was a gamble, and that's one of the things that makes Shazo so good. Okay, so he's got one more card in there. My bet is it's going to be the shielded card. I haven't done the math on what points he's got, but that's the most common one I would see at this point. Come on, Hicks. Yeah. And he gets to attack again. So he will punch twice and then also shoot. Which took that guy from full health to almost nothing. And even though I, again, am somewhat vulnerable here, I've got my big game hunter to take this guy down, and this should comfortably be a wipe. Yeah. And Shazo is not Farsight or Shadow Sun, so he's not going to automatically get the full healing when he deploys this card. Not that it matters, because everything that was there died. Okay. This guy's about the same price point, a little higher, but is also a predictable pick in that deck. Ow. And this is where it's really important to mix in cards that do have... Ooh, yeah, all right, only rank 2 shields. Hicks is probably going to take this one home for me. Not quite, but close. Now he's going to kill my Penitent Engine because he doesn't really have a choice not to, and that will win the game. Woo! But there, I really did want to go ahead and highlight how every single piece did an important job and how deployment was important. Choosing what to put when was really important. And I did get a little bit lucky with how my opponent deployed and kind of what was in that deck. Because had that Shazo had one more shield, it would have been a lot more difficult to get him. But yeah, or had more of those ships been barrage cards, had one of them been long strike, that could have been a much more difficult match. But as it was, that went fairly well. So yeah, again, I am fairly confident in saying that Canoness is one of the best warlords in the game because she's in a faction that has plenty of chaff cards that couldn't go away, and also other cards that benefit significantly from having free melee attacks and just have good stats flat. She also is on the cheaper side. She's got shields. Really, really good because she makes the end game hard to close out. She makes every bit of gain your opponent gets cost something as well on the way down, and just gives you a ton of flexibility. Now, the randomness is an issue in terms of when and what those melee attacks go against. So you do want to guard against that with your deployment, with what you set up to die when, and then also with what cards you put in your deck. You really want to maximize the number of cards you have that will have meaningful bonus melee attacks, because you could play a game where all of them go to some complete junk. So you want to make sure that as few as possible cards in your deck have crappy melee stats so that you won't waste any of those bonus hits. So there you go. There's your Canoness guide, and yeah, let me know what you think.